And welcome back. As we get ready to dive into our next programming concept, we are going to today talk about the vector class, which is going to be kind of our window into looking at a new kind of class structure. So let's just for a moment talk about what vectors are. Now, vectors, of course, are simply just another class in Java. Particularly if we look at the Java standard libraries, you'll see that it behaves pretty much exactly the same as our familiar class now, ArrayList. In fact, almost everything we've said about the class ArrayList will hold true for the vector class. And almost in all situations, you can use either the class ArrayList or the class vector, but a lot of times ArrayList is preferred because of its flexibility and just familiarity with many programmers. Now, there are differences between the two classes, but those differences involve material that we have not covered here. Now, if you encounter the class vector in someone's code, chances are that the vector class could be replaced by an ArrayList class and would require some only minimal changes to the code. Well, why is this? Why are we looking at this class that we're not even going to take a big look at? Well, the idea is I want to get you familiar with this idea of a parameterized class and moreover with this idea of generics. Well, the ArrayList class is what is typically known as a parameterized class. It has a parameter, which we've been denoting as base_type, that can be replaced with any reference type to contain a class for ArrayList with specified types, such as we looked at. You could be a class type, you could be a string type, you could be a wrapper class such as integer. ArrayList is simply just a class that was defined and placed within the standard Java library package java.util. So you should be able to define these types of classes and their similar structures. And what is that structure that we're going to look at? Well, Java has this ability for us to allow class definitions with parameters for their types. All right, just like we saw with ArrayList, you can have a string type of an ArrayList. You can have a integer type of an ArrayList. These classes that have type parameters are called parameterized classes or generic definitions, or simply just known as generics. Now, you already know how to use these classes with a type parameter because we've been doing this with our ArrayList, so it's not anything new for us to see these types of classes here. Now, there are a quick pitfall before we can kind of dive fully into these classes. We want to first recognize that there's non-parameterized versions of things like ArrayList and of the vector class. The ArrayList and vector classes we have discussed in this lesson have a type parameter for the base type. There's also ArrayList and vector classes that do not have a parameter for the base type. That parameter there, or the base type, really is just object. These are actually left over from an older version of Java. And remember, our previous lesson, we talked about how some things were different in Java 5.0. The kind of same thing applies here. So if you're like, oh, which version is this? Well, you can always check the Java documentation to make sure you have documentation for ArrayList and vector classes that would have a type parameter. And if you look in the notation that we're kind of familiar with, you'll either see something like ArrayList E or vector E, or like ArrayList T and vector T. I've seen a lot of ArrayList T, for example, that gets used within Java documentation. This is always a good way for us to look and see which version of this is going to be. Now, we aren't going to get too much deeper here because we want to take some time to actually look at how to use generics properly. So we're actually going to say that for next time, but this is just to get you at thinking about if we have a similar structure that we can use with ArrayList that we can do in another class, how can we do that and apply that to our own classes?